Where's my Bible? Here's my Bible. All right. I'm going to ask Brother Ozzy to open us with prayer, and then we'll just get right into it.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the truth that is revealed to us, Lord. Thank you that we can rely on it as unchanging and perfectly true. God, teach us something new out of your word. The pastor for the preparation he's done, so with the Spirit, and speak truth in to us. In the heavenly name we pray.
Amen. All right. I'm going to pass out some verses, and we're just going to read through those really quickly. Ozzy, you take Revelation chapter 22, verse 7. And then, Brother Lane, you take Revelation 22, verse 10. And then, Josh, would you mind reading Revelation 22, verses 18 and 19 for us, sir? We'll just read through those. And as soon as you're ready, go.
Revelation 22, verse 7. Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecy of this book.
And said unto me, seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. Testify unto every man that hears the words of the prophecy of this book. Any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. If any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part of the book of life, and out of the holy city, of the things that are written in this book.
You know, when you see the word prophecy, it gets your attention. We like prophecy. Everybody likes prophecy. You can see that when you're, in America, when you go shopping through the supermarkets, there's always the supermarket tabloids, and there's always some so-called prophet, some psychic, or somebody who's trying to tell you what the future is going to hold. And then we have the horoscope. Oh, horoscope. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that, or maybe not. In every major newspaper. It fascinates us because we're eternal creatures and we want to know the future. And then we want to know not only the immediate future, but even beyond that. We like to know these things, and we're fascinated by it. The Bible is filled with prophecy. There's a man who wrote a book called the Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy. And he listed 1,239 prophecies in the Old Testament with another 578 prophecies in the New Testament, okay? So that's a total of 1,817 prophecies. And those prophecies are taught in about 26.85% of the Bible. So over 1/4 of the Bible is prophecy. Okay, now understand that for us, a lot of prophecy has already been fulfilled, but it's prophecy nevertheless. We are starting a course this morning on New Testament prophecy. And if you are interested in getting credit for the course, I'll be teaching portions of the textbook here. And then there will be a lot of things that you'll need to do online. So if you're taking the course, you'll need to let me know that you want to do that so that I can log you in to the class online and you can get started, and it will guide you. It will tell you everything you need to know from there. We need to lay a foundation with some terms, okay? And there are various terms that we're going to be using throughout the course, and so if you're not familiar with these terms, I want to help you become a little familiar with them before we actually get down to the meat, if you will, the meat and potatoes. There is the term postmillennialism, and postmillennialism is a position that assumes that Christ will come after the 1,000-year period called a millennium. If you are already lost and you already do not know what I am talking about, that's okay. The more I expose you to this stuff, the more it's going to become clear to you. Also, if you buy the book, you can actually read the things that I'm saying more slowly and to get a better grip on what all of that's about And that's available, of course, in ebook and paperback and hardback, and it's out there. Just go to Amazon. I think I put the link in everything yesterday, so you can find all of that. Postmillennialism didn't work. We had several wars which made it very clear that that wasn't going to be happening. Then there is another position called amillennialism. When you put "a" at the beginning of a word, that means not, okay? So amillennialism was very popular in recent years, but it, it kind of destroys a literal reading of, half a chapter of the book of Revelation. So amillennialism, you can read more about that. In the book, there's like 7 or 8 paragraphs, and I'm just kind of summing things up quickly for you. The idea there is that Jesus is, that things are going to get better and better and better, and there's, anyway. But what I want you to really get is this term, premillennialism. Premillennialism is the teaching that the return of the Lord Jesus Christ will precede or come before the millennium. He will establish the millennium. Now, this is laid out quite clearly in the book of Revelation, where the return of Christ is described in chapter 19, and then you have the description of the millennial kingdom following right after in chapter 20. Somebody please tell me, what does millennium mean? 1,000 years. These are very major positions. You got postmillennialism, amillennialism, premillennialism. Premillennialism is what we are, or what I am at least, and hopefully by the end of the course, if you are not, you will know what that is, and you will also be premillennial. But this view holds that the church age, which we are in, will end with the rapture, and a simultaneous resurrection of believers will happen. After the rapture, there's a 7-year period called the tribulation, and then the Battle of Armageddon, and then Jesus comes and establishes a millennium. Now, you say, oh, that's okay. We're going to go over this again. I'm exposing you to some terms, some things that I'm going to be using, trying to give you an idea of what some of these words mean. And so millennialism is a literal 1,000-year reign that Jesus begins when he comes, okay? In the book, I have 4 reasons why premillennialists are right. I'll give you the reason and just kind of touch on it very quickly, and then you can go to the book itself and read it for yourself. You say, well, I don't want to buy the book. Well, you're going to miss a lot, okay? Number 1, the Bible distinguishes between the rapture and the second advent. Now, throughout the course, and I try to do this when I'm preaching and teaching, I try to use these terms differently. The rapture is when Jesus comes in the clouds and he takes us home. We go up to meet him in the clouds, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. The second advent is 7 years later, when Jesus comes all the way down to the earth and establishes the millennium. Okay? So the Bible distinguishes between the rapture and the second advent. And this is an important point for us to remember. Number 2, the Bible distinguishes between Israel and the church. Israel is related to all of the Old Testament covenants. The church is not. Now, we are blessed in those covenants. For example, the Abrahamic covenant, that would be a blessing to, Abraham and his family would be a blessing to the whole world, and we're a part of the world, so we're blessed in that sense. But the Abrahamic covenant was actually for Israel, not for the church. The New Covenant, even the New Covenant, if you read every passage in the Bible on the New Covenant, to put it in context, it's specifically speaking of Israel, but we are blessed in a secondary way through that, okay? The Bible makes a distinction between the church and Israel. There are those that teach that the church replaced Israel and that God is done with Israel. That is not true. As we go through New Testament prophecy, I think we're going to see some of that, especially when we get to the book of Romans, okay? The Bible also makes a distinction between 2 resurrections. There's one resurrection to life. If you're saved, that one is for you. There's another resurrection to damnation. If you're lost, that one is for you. And I guess you can figure out just from the names that one is good, one not so much, right? So there are two distinct resurrections. In the book of Revelation, when we get there weeks from now, we are going to clarify some of that as we're going through that. The first resurrection is, some people refer to it also as the rapture. There's a little bit more to it than that. We'll learn more about that. The second resurrection is what we find in Revelation chapter 20, verses 5 through 15. You can look at that if you want to. We're not going to read it. But that's where Christ calls forth the dead to his throne, and they are judged. The fourth thing that you need to note is that the Bible distinguishes 7 different judgments. First, there's the judgment of the believer's self. This is one that we do to ourselves. Okay? We judge ourselves. I hope that you judge yourself every day, because that is one of the major judgments that the Bible speaks of. A second judgment is a judgment of the believer's works. Some people call that the Bema Seat judgment. Okay? That's where we will have the reception or loss of rewards based upon the motives of our works. Okay? There's the judgment of the nations. You can read about that in Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 36, if you're so inclined to do so. This is where Jesus calls all the nations together, and it's after the tribulation, and there's a judgment. And then there's the judgment of the Jews. In the judgment of the nations, and I'll say this, we're going to develop this more as we get into it. In the judgment of the nations, the Jews are not in that judgment. They get their own. And we'll talk more about that. So there's the judgment of the Jews. And then there is also the judgment of the Antichrist and the false prophet, of course. Judgment of angels. That's an interesting one to study. We'll talk more about that. And then the judgment of the lost, which is called the Great White Throne. So these 4 major points are what leads us to a premillennial position, because all the other positions could not support these teachings from the Scriptures. Rapture. I mentioned the rapture. What's the rapture? Somebody tell me what the rapture is. I told you, now you tell me. Okay, how does that happen? Is it physical or spiritual? It's definitely physical. Okay? You are going to disappear. Now, you've seen the movies. Is there going to be a pile of clothes in your chair after you I don't know. I kind of would like to be clothed when I meet Jesus in the clouds. So if he's going to leave these clothes here, I hope he puts some more on me. Yeah. White robes. Okay. There are various theories to the rapture. There's one theory called the partial rapture. It's kind of a weird theory. It's like, the good Christians go before the tribulation, and the ones that were not so good, they go kind of in the middle. The bad Christians have to suffer a little bit. That's called the partial rapture. I'm not going to speak a whole lot on that one. It's a main viewpoint, but not a whole lot of people actually believe that. There's the mid-tribulation view. Some premillennials believe that the church will be taken up at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation, before things get really, really bad. And so there is that view. That's for people who want to suffer just a little bit, and then they can actually be glorified. Pay no attention to the woman behind the curtain. Then there's post-tribulationalism. Post-tribulationalism teaches that the church will go through the tribulation, and at the end of the tribulation, then we will get raptured. That one always confused me a little bit, because my understanding of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is that we're going to meet the Lord in the clouds, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. And I couldn't understand, how can you hold a post-tribulation view? At the end of the tribulation, I go up to the clouds and then immediately come back down, because right after that's a millennium, right? So that didn't seem to make sense to me. So post-tribulationalism is a main view out there. However, it's not one that I necessarily believe is biblical. There's another one called pre-wrath rapture. This is kind of convoluted. It's hard to wrap this up in a nutshell. But with the pre-wrath rapture, it's kind of a new theory. And let me tell you something about Bible doctrine, okay? If it's never been taught before, it's not true, okay? If it's new, it's not true. If it's true, it's not new. Okay? The pre-wrath rapture theory is relatively new. And it's kind of like, remember I told you that there's a pre-tribulation view. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then there's a mid-tribulation view. Pre-wrath is like kind of in the middle in between those two. And it's just kind of weird. So I don't want to get too much into that. So if you really want to know the nuts and bolts, take the course online, buy the book, read the section on that, and you'll see that. Now, what I do want is to focus on pre-tribulationism. What does that mean? Some of y'all are looking at me like a deer caught in the headlights. Man, all these big words. What are you talking about? What's pre-tribulation? Yeah, so there's a 7-year tribulation. Everybody knows about that, right? You got to know about that one. That's all the movies are about, the tribulation. We all know about that. Well, the pre-tribulation view means that Jesus is going to come before the tribulation, but not all the way to the earth. He's just going to come and take us home. Okay, that's called the pre-tribulation view. Biblically speaking, there's plenty of scriptural support for this. There's a guy, his name is John F. Walvoord. Anybody ever hear of him? President of Dallas Theological Seminary. And he wrote a book entitled The Rapture Question. In the book, he lists 50 reasons why he believes the scriptures teach a pre-tribulational rapture. So the pre-tribulational rapture theory is very easily and very strongly supported by scripture. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. Brother Kim, can you read that for me? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. All right, so this 2-verse passage actually teaches us a lot about the rapture. For example, we learned that the Lord is going to meet the saints in the clouds, that those who are dead in Christ will be raised, and that the saints who are living will be caught up together with them. And so we actually learn a lot about the occasion of the rapture and how it's going to happen. I don't understand how God is going to raise the dead. Some of these people have been dead 2,000 years. There's not much left of them but bones, and even in some cases not even that. But somehow the Lord can do that. If he can create the universe, I don't think he's going to have much of a problem, putting together a body. So anyway, post-tribulationists like to say, they like to point to Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 through 21. And they consider that describes the rapture, but it does not. That passage really teaches us about the second advent, when the Lord comes for the second advent. And so don't get confused when you're reading through the scriptures. You have to remember, as I said, that there are distinctions made between the rapture and the second advent. They are not the same thing, okay? We have to keep that in mind. You can find the same thing in Zechariah chapter 14, and where you have a description of the second advent. Zechariah does not mention the resurrection, but there has to be a resurrection if there's going to be a rapture. So there is that. A couple more verses I want us to read. Matthew 24, verse 36. Brother Duke, can you read that? Matthew 24, verse 36. And then Brother Kim Suwon, Kyung-Soo, you read Acts chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, okay? Matthew 24, verse 36. Matthew 24, 36. So Matthew 24, verse 36. Careful exegesis of Matthew 24 will lead you to know that this is not speaking of the rapture. This is speaking of the second advent. I'll say more about that in a minute, okay? But Matthew 24:36 is speaking of the second advent, and it says that no one knows when that's going to happen. Okay? Acts chapter 1, verses 6 and 7.
When they therefore were come together, they asked him, saying, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the time or the season, which the Father has put in his own power.
All right, and again, they were talking about the coming of the kingdom, which would be the millennium. And Jesus says in both places that you don't get to know that. Okay? So every time you hear somebody date setting, they're wrong. Okay? Well, actually, there's been so many dates picked that, somebody's probably going to be right at some point. But anyway, we don't get to know when the second advent is. And if we never get to know when the second advent is, that means that we also will not get to know when the rapture is. Because Bible prophecy tells us there's a 7-year gap. So if we don't get to know one, we actually don't get to know the other. If we know either one, then we know both. You see what I'm saying? So I want to, put that into perspective. Jesus taught that we don't get to know when the rapture is going to happen. What does that mean? That means you got to always be ready. Okay? You don't get to go, okay, well, it's going to be next month. So, starting the end of September, I'm going to kind of clean up my act and get things right. We don't get to know that, okay? You're supposed to always be ready. Is everybody clear on the idea of the rapture and the second advent being two separate events? Everybody's clear on that? Yes, sir.
What's the difference between second advent and tribulation?
All right, it's a totally different advent or totally different event. Okay, so you have the rapture. We go. 7 years of tribulation because somebody broke a mirror. After that, you have the second advent where Jesus returns to the earth and establishes a millennial kingdom. Okay, so these are three separate things happening. We come with him, yes, because 1 Thessalonians 4 says, so shall we ever be with the Lord. Yes. It's talking about the second advent. It is not talking about the rapture. When we get to Matthew 24 and we do a deep study of that, it will become even more clear to you. Okay? And I've heard sermons on the rapture from Matthew 24, and I always go, dude, did you even read the first half of the chapter? But anyway. 3 more verses we need to read. Okay? Ozzy, you take Romans 5:9. Chie, you take 1 Thessalonians 5:9. And Bella, you just walked in. You got your Bible? Okay, you need that. We're a Bible church here. You get Revelation chapter 3, verse 10. Okay, these 3 verses are some precious promises. Now, I have said again and again and again that the rapture happens before the tribulation. Why? Why do I believe that? Now we're going to find out. Okay, Revelation 5:9. I'm sorry, Romans 5:9. Keep me straight.
Romans 5, verse 9. Much more then, being now justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him.
Question, what are we saved from?
Wrath.
Thank you. 1 Thessalonians 5:9. Question, what are we saved from? Wrath. Okay. Revelation 3:10. All right, consider what this verse says. It says that there is an hour of temptation that will come on the whole world to try the whole world. That's never happened before. Okay? Well, let me say it this way. It's not happened since Revelation was written. It did happen in the flood. Okay? But it hasn't happened since Revelation was written. So there is something coming that is referred to here as the hour of temptation. And we're not going to go through it. Jesus said to them that he would keep them from it. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17 made no mention of the wicked. They are not taken into judgment at this time. There is not a general resurrection. There is a resurrection to life and a resurrection to damnation. Again, remember, These are terms that we use, but we have to remember the Bible makes distinctions in these areas, and we need to learn these areas as such. Matthew 13, verse 30. Who has not read that? Who have I not called on to read yet? Okay, do that. Matthew 13, 30. Now, I need you guys to pay really careful attention here, because you may have heard that this verse said one thing when it doesn't say that at all. Okay? Go ahead.
Matthew 13:30. Let those who grow together and sow the harvest. And in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them. But gather the wheat in my barn.
All right, so Matthew 13:30 talks about gathering together something, and that something's going to get what? Burned. Does that sound like heaven to you? That kind of sounds like that other place to me, right? If you read through the parables in Matthew 13, you're going to find out that they're not talking about the rapture when it's talking about two are working in one field. One is taken and the other is left. There's a rapture, and then there is a second advent. When the second advent happens, Jesus prepares those who are still living after the tribulation for the millennial kingdom, and they are taken away to judgment. They're not taken away to glory, okay? So we look at that verse completely backwards sometimes, and that's why I wanted to point that out. So, yes.
It says, in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares. And the tares are then to be burned, and then the wheat is to be barn.
Right, so what happens is at the judgment of the nations, when Jesus comes, judgment of the nations, I mentioned that earlier, everybody knows what I'm referring to here. Jesus returns at the second advent, there's the judgment of the nations. He's going to separate man as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, remember? Well, the goats are the bad guys. They're cast into hell. The sheep, they go into the kingdom. If you read it, who gets thrown into hell? The goats. Who is judged first? The goats. You see that? So it's interesting. We'll get to that when we get to Matthew. Okay. In the book, which again I'm encouraging you to buy the book because I'm really skipping a lot of stuff that you need to know if you're going to take the course. If you do the online thing and buy the book and read the book, you'll be okay for the tests. Okay. But there's a section on the kingdom concept, and I'm just kind of skipping that. It's good information to know, but you can read that and gather on your own. What I want us to do now, before we actually start looking at each prophetic passage, is to set aside a little bit of time today and build a biblical prophetic framework. That's what we need. A biblical prophetic framework. It's important to understand the basic prophetic framework before we start studying each New Testament passages. And I'm not telling you that you have to do this, but I would recommend that you make yourself a timeline somehow. And on the timeline, as we're going through the various verses of prophecy in the New Testament, put it on your timeline. You'll be able to do that. And you'll see how things fall together, flow together so much more easily, I think. So, what is the basic order of the coming events? I guess you could label these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever if you wanted to. But the first one is the rapture. That is the very next event on God's prophetic calendar. When is it going to happen? I hope it happens today. But I don't know when it's going to happen. Okay? The rapture. Then there's the tribulation. 7 Jewish prophetic years. I said that it was 7 Jewish prophetic years. It's not 7 of our years. When we study the tribulation in a little bit, I'll show you more on that. Then there's the second advent, Christ literally, physically returning to the earth. What happens after the second advent? You want to say millennium because I've said that several times, but there's actually one event that happens between the second advent and the millennial kingdom, and it's described by theologists and Bible scholars with bigger brains than mine. They just call it a 75-day gap. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah. There's a 75-day gap between the tribulation and the millennium. Lots of things will happen in that gap. We'll talk about that. Then you get the millennium. What's the millennium? 1,000 years. And who's the king? Jesus. King Jesus, right? And we will rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. Then after the millennium, there is something called the little season. That's what the Bible calls it. It's a little season. You can read about that, getting toward the end of the book of Revelation. After the little season, there is the battle of Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog. Then the judgment of the lost. And then the new heaven and new earth. And that's the order. So I'm going to go over these again real quickly for you in case you're taking notes. You got the rapture, the tribulation, the second advent, 75-day gap, millennial kingdom, little season, battle of Gog and Magog, judgment of the lost, new heaven and new earth. So we've got about 9 things here, 9 events that are coming in God's prophetic calendar. Okay, so that's the order of events. The rapture. We've been talking about the rapture. Let's talk some more about the rapture. Go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. In Acts 1:11, the Bible tells us that, when the Lord was ascending, when he ascended up to heaven, 2 men in white apparel were standing nearby while they were staring up into the clouds. And these men said, "Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? The same Jesus which was taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as you've seen him go into heaven." So what's going to happen in the rapture? It's going to be a literal, personal. Jesus is literally, personally going to return for his saints. Hebrews 9:28 tells us that Christ was once offered to bear the sin of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. Okay? So the Lord's return, when he comes, it's not going to be some spiritual thing like, there are some cults that believe that Jesus has come already. Where? Right? It's going to be sudden, and it's going to be unexpected. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. But the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. You might not know when the thief plans on coming, but if you're smart, you lock your doors and windows at night because you know the thief is going to come, right? Now, I grew up in in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. You did not go to bed at night without locking your doors and windows because the thief was going to come. You just didn't know when, so you locked them every day and every night, right? So this is the thrust of 1 Thessalonians 5. We're not going to be caught off guard because we know he's coming. When? We don't know, but we know he's coming. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 37. Hebrews 10:37. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come, and will not tarry. In other words, it's going to happen. When's it going to happen? I don't know, but it's definitely going to happen. The Bible teaches us that again and again and again. What's the purpose of the rapture? Well, the Lord's purpose is to receive his own. That includes the living believers and even those who died in the faith. John 14, verse 3. Who wants that?
And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also.
Question, did Jesus go?
Yes.
Yes. And he said, if I go, I'm going to come again to receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Okay? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we've been there several times already, verses 13 through 17, teaches us again about the rapture. And it says, I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep. In other words, they died in the faith. That ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God. The dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. The moment of death is the moment that the soul departs from the body. The scriptures teach that. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. That being said, when the believer dies, his body goes into the ground to be raised as a glorified body at the rapture. I've been a Christian now for 42 years, and some of my mentors in my first 5 to 10 years, some of them are dead. They're with the Lord now. But before they died in their teaching, they would say, I expect the Lord to come in my lifetime. I feel the same way. I expect that the Lord will come in my lifetime. I just don't see how it could get any worse. That's what they thought. That's what I thought. That's what Paul thought. As he wrote concerning the rapture, he wrote as if he was going to experience it in his lifetime. But he didn't. Now Jesus says, surely I come quickly. And so you're going, quickly? 2,000 years? You call that quickly? Well, when you're an eternal God and time is only this much on your line, yeah, quickly, right? So keeping it in perspective, when we die, our body goes into the ground, and when the resurrection happens, the Lord in some way remakes our body. But if we don't die, he changes our body. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 42 and 43. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. Now, I wouldn't pretend to understand how a body that has long turned to ashes and dust can be reassembled and raised from the dead. I don't understand it, but I know that's what the scriptures teach. So I just believe it. I don't struggle with it, right? I don't understand how a black cow can eat green grass and give white milk either. So, I'm just simple like that. I just know it happens, okay? 2 Corinthians 5:10. Who wants to read that? Okay, I've got way too many volunteers. Can you, just one, okay, go ahead. Okay, so associated with the rapture is a time of judgment for the believer's works. This is not a heaven or hell judgment. This is looking at your motives behind why you did what you did and receiving rewards for that, okay? The correct view of pre-tribulationism holds that the rapture is imminent. There are no other prophetic events before the rapture on God's prophetic calendar. And there are tons of verses to support that. Philippians 4:5, James 5:8 and 9, Revelation 3:10, Revelation 22:7, on and on and on. Okay? After the rapture, what's next? We got about 3 minutes. Let's see what we can do with this. What is it? What happens between the rapture and the second advent? What? Somebody said it. Who said it? Tribulation. 7-year period during which the world will experience sorrow and suffering like nothing it has ever seen before. During this time, there's going to be a worldwide apostasy led by a man referred to in the scriptures as the Antichrist. And the Bible lists several other titles for him as well. He's called the man of sin, the son of perdition, that wicked or the wicked one, the beast in Revelation 13. A lot of people try to identify the Antichrist with one world leader or another. But the fact is the Antichrist will not be revealed until after the rapture occurs. Okay? That's when he'll be revealed. And again, he may be a world figure today, but if he is, we don't know who he is. Okay? We got some pretty bad guys in leadership all over the world. Could one of those pretty bad guys be the Antichrist? Well, there are some specifics. We'll learn more about that as we study him more in depth. But we don't know. Keep in mind that Satan cannot bring someone back from the dead. There are some people that think, oh, Judas Iscariot was called the son of perdition. and the Antichrist is called the son of perdition, so they must be the same guy. No, that would be what we would call a reincarnation, and God doesn't do that. Okay? Same thing with John the Baptist and Elijah. There's no reincarnation is not a biblical doctrine. Okay? So that's unbiblical. The Antichrist is going to have an assistant who is often referred to as the false prophet. This assistant will have satanic miraculous powers, and he will aid him in directing all worship to the Antichrist. So, what's the next event on God's prophetic calendar? The rapture. What's after that? The tribulation. What's after that? Second Advent. Yeah, I think I can do this. Immediately after the tribulation is an event which we will call the Second Advent. Some people simply call it the Second Coming. I try to stay away from that because it causes a lot of confusion. The Second Coming. Well, what are you talking about? You're talking about the rapture, or the Second Advent, or the two, or together in one, or what are you talking about? So I try not to say Second Coming. The difference between the rapture and the Second Advent is obvious. At the rapture, Jesus comes to the clouds. At the Second Advent, Jesus returns to the Mount of Olives and begins his earthly millennial kingdom. At the rapture, Jesus comes for his saints. At the Second Advent, Jesus returns with his saints. Read Revelation 19. He comes on a white horse, and there are people with him. Saints of God riding horses on behind him. I imagine behind him, maybe kind of off to the side, I don't know. But they're with him, and they're wearing robes of white. Who are these people? They're not angels, okay? They're clothed in the righteousness of Christ, and we'll see that when we get to Revelation 18. So when he comes in the Second Advent, there's going to be a great battle called the Battle of Armageddon, and the armies of the world are going to gather at Armageddon. Anybody know where Armageddon's at? The Valley of Megiddo. Where is it? Good. Very good. Can we nail that? Can we bring that down a little bit? It's in Israel. Yeah. It's a huge valley. Okay. I remember when I was there, I was standing on the top of Mount Tabor, and you could look out and you can actually see the valleys. There are a couple of valleys you can see from the top of the mountain, and it's huge. You could definitely put a lot of people in there. So there's going to be that battle, Battle of Armageddon. Jerusalem will be under siege by all the people of the earth. And Christ will return and change everything. Okay, he's going to defeat the armies of the world at Armageddon and establish his millennial kingdom. So we'll stop here today. Come back next week. We're going to briefly touch on the 75-day gap and briefly touch on the millennium, then the little season and so forth, as we move on into the New Testament passages that are prophetic passages. That's what we're going to be studying. And so if you want to take the course, send me a text, send me an email, send me something letting me know you want to take the course, okay? I will create a user and a password for you, a password which you can change as soon as you log on. I'll send all that information to you via email. Then you can log on, start the class. The first page will tell you everything about the class, okay? And you can start from there. What I'm going to be doing here in Sunday school, because some people are taking it, some people are not, I'm just going to teach the book, skipping parts of the book because it's long. It's 400 and some pages, and I can't do all of that in 18 weeks. So we're going to be skipping passages, and you'll need to read that. Now, anybody can buy the book. It's out there on Amazon. I sent the link out yesterday. Did everybody see the link? Did anybody use it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if you're taking a class, you're going to need to buy that because I'm actually not going to teach everything in the book. Okay. All right. With that, are there any questions on the rapture or the tribulation or the second advent? We've touched a lot on those this morning. Is everyone clear on what those are? Were you clear on what those are 2 hours ago? Praise God. I taught something. That's good. Lane, close us in prayer.